Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, hopefully having an amazing day. This is going to be a very Nvidia focused video, but there is a lot of stuff happening on Team Green at this point. While AMD are certainly hard at work with UDNA, and of course we have processors like the Zen 6 releases next year, Nvidia are just really in the headlines because of a few very interesting updates. The first of which is an RTX 50 Super tease from Nvidia themselves. Well, kind of. We see basically an RTX 5090 may actually be using higher capacity RAM, which could indicate that we see a 48GB variant in the future. And of course, this goes along with all of the other rumors with RTX 50 Super refresh, including of course the 5080. And then we have Nvidia's N1 and N1X, and these are going to be platforms which incorporate Nvidia's consumer-facing ARM processors, and they are very performant and will also leverage the RTX 50 series of graphics cards. There's a lot of stuff to talk about here, so let's just get right onto it after this quick message from the sponsor of the video. If you're running a copy of Windows 10 which isn't activated, of course, not only do you have to worry about the missing customization options, but there's also that annoying Windows desktop watermark reminding you to activate. Today's video is sponsored by WhoKeys.com, and they've an excellent price on Windows 10 Professional as well as Home keys. Yeah, and they also of course sell games. I've bought a few Windows 10 keys with my own personal account to test everything was legit and worked in preparation for this sponsored video. You can pick up one of their keys for 25% off using the coupon code RGT in the checkout. There's links to their website in the video description. Also, if you're building a few systems, there's bundles available too. Again, you can check out WhoKeys.com and use the coupon code RGT for 25% off the listed Windows 10 key prices. So because my eyesight sucks balls, I'm now going to wear my glasses. And well, first of all, you can see an image on screen, and this is from a video that's a couple of months old now. Now, I want to give credit here to videocards.com, where I initially spotted this, but WCCF Tech have a nice breakdown of this as well. And it's designing the Founder Edition RTX 5090. And you may say to yourself, well, okay, that's nice, but why do we give a crap? Like, it's the 5090, what new information is there? Well, very interestingly, if you look at the memory chips, which of course just surround this absolutely monstrous GB202 die, you can see a very specific name on the chips themselves. Now, interestingly, this seems to correspond to 3GB modules that have now been popping up online. Now, if you notice, the end of these modules have SC28, and a Chinese retailer actually it was spotted by Ruby Rapids, who is a account on Twitter. Of course, I will leave a link to this in the video description. And they actually have the Samsung 3GB GDDR7 modules available for purchase. And once again, I want to reiterate, these are the same modules that end in SC28, which again seems to be the GPU that Nvidia were teasing with the Founders Edition 48GB. So it's very interesting. This means at the very least Nvidia have been testing internally the 48GB modules. Now, it's also possible that this is for another variant, and basically Nvidia simply reused the same footage for another purpose, for example, professional card or what have you. But I find this very interesting indeed. Now, again, just to remind you guys, there have been a lot of rumors, and it's almost certain at this stage that the RTX 5080 Super will be launching, and this is of course going to feature 24GB of RAM. The rest of the specs, such as the number of SM and that type of thing, they remain consistent. So the big change here of course is the amount of memory, and it also seems like the 5070 is going to be getting the super treatment as well. I don't personally suspect we're going to see these launch anytime soon. I think it's going to be Q4 or maybe early next year, so that of course would be Q1. But I will be very curious to see what Nvidia's plans are for Rubin as well, and what the introduction is of RTX 60. I would also be very interested to see whether Nvidia goes MCM or whether it's still going to be a monolithic die. Let me know in the comments below. What do you expect from Rubin? Do you think Nvidia will move on to a chiplet-based solution, or do you think they're still going to stick to a monolithic die and perhaps have some type of die shrink and that type of thing to squeeze as much performance as possible? And now let's move on to Nvidia, specifically the N1 based platform. I want to give credit here to Grey, or previously known as Olrak29 on Twitter, for this discovery, and basically these are Geekbench results. Now, while Geekbench is not perfect, particularly for some benchmarks when it comes to multi-threading, it does serve as at least some insight into the performance of these processors. Now, basically, if we were to take a look at this image, you can see that this was run on Ubuntu, and this is a 6.2.2 for Linux A Arch. There is also the difference, of course, between different versions of Geekbench, and things can change quite significantly, not least of all, of course, if you compare like 5 versus 6, that becomes even crazier. But here it states there is a single processor with support for up to 20 threads. Now notice the memory size, which is basically, I'm just going to round up here, 119 gigabytes. Well, actually, I'm rounding down slightly. Now, obviously, that's very unlikely to be the amount of memory that's in the system, so it's either 1, Geekbench isn't detecting this correctly, or 2, there's some amount of memory that's being reserved for the GPU, but I know it doesn't seem quite likely, so my guess is perhaps it's just getting a little bit confused. It's probably not a hard reserve, but maybe just getting a little bit confused with just the configuration being a little bit unusual, and that is putting it somewhat mildly. But you can see the model here is being detected as Nvidia N1X, and we're looking at around 3,100 points for the single core score. I find that really hard to say, I have no idea why, but multi-core score is around 19,000. Now, videocards.com did a nice comparison here to show you the different performance numbers. Now, videocards.com did a quite nice write-up to show you guys how the processor scales against different competitors. So, for example, the 9800X 3D here scores around 3,300 points. Obviously, again, these results will differ depending on your system configuration, especially with a desktop processor. Obviously, things can change significantly, the amount of the memory types you're using, and so on and so forth. But around 3,300 points for the 9800X 3D. The AI Max is scoring just under 3,000, so it's quite similar in performance to the AI Max. And meanwhile, the multi-thread score, again, just around 19,000 for the N1, whereas that is basically putting it on par with a 9800X 3D. Obviously, a processor such as the 285K from Intel has significantly more cores, more threads available, so it's not 100% a fair comparison. Now, there is also the fact that the clock frequency here, the base speed, is just 2.81 gigahertz. Now, most likely this is not a final chip, and that is important, of course, as well, because who knows how, you know, it's limited, maybe it's not boosting correctly, and so on and so forth. So there's probably still something left in the tank. I'm going to be very interested to see how these are faring. Obviously, if you were to run this on like Windows, you know, Windows for ARM, and you want to do x86 emulation, performance perhaps may suffer just a little bit. But overall, I think more competition in the space is always a good thing. I am very hopeful, of course, for AMD and x86 in as well, but you know, there is a time and the place for ARM. I'll be very interested if, obviously, these are announced pretty soon. The rumor was it was going to be at the recent Nvidia event, of course, Computex, but for whatever reason it wasn't announced at that point. So I think they are going to be coming. I'll be very interested to see how power efficient these things are. So Nvidia have recently also disclosed performance of various RTX 50 series graphics cards in a couple of upcoming games, and perhaps one of the most noteworthy ones is, of course, Stellar Blade. Now, they give performance numbers with both DLSS on and off across multiple different RTX 50 cards, and I do think this is quite interesting, so I do want to mention it just real quick. Now, obviously this game, it's not exactly running the most impressive of, you know, graphical technologies. It's using an older version of Unreal. It's not like you have path tracing on stuff on it, so you can expect it runs pretty well, but they are using a test system of a 9800X3D. The grey numbers are representative, of course, of DLSS off, and you can see that the 4K results here, again, these are desktop GPUs, you're looking at around 170 frames a second with the RTX 5090 scaling down to 110, and 96 for the 5080 and 5070 Ti respectively. The 5070 with grey and DLSS off gets down to around 76. And finally, the 5060 Ti is around 54 frames a second, meaning you could probably just enable without multi-frame generation DLSS and get around 60 to maybe 80 frames a second, depending on the complexity of the scene. I personally don't think like multi-frame generation with a game like this on a 5090 makes too much sense, or even a 5080. If you want to lock to 120 Hz or 165 Hz or something, maybe you would use like DLSS quality mode, but I personally wouldn't use frame generation for a GPU of this caliber with this amount of performance. I do think one thing's kind of amusing though, and this is like not new, this is not like groundbreaking information, but it just tickles me. Every time I read this, it just tickles me. Notice under the 5060 Ti, the note here is 5060 Ti, 16GB model. Hey, Nvidia, why do you need to, yeah, bro? Why do you need to state that? I know it's so childish. I just think it's so whimsical. I'm sorry, it's not very professional, but it's just I read that and I just cracked up. But again, that's not new. However, that's not under all of them. Like Dune: The Awakening doesn't even list the 5060 Ti for 4K, for example. So obviously not everything. But yeah. Anyway, I think that's just about it for this particular video. I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.